killers. We all know them. Perhaps not their name or their face, but we do know the fear they bring. Serial killers are monsters among men. But what if I told you science was responsible for their creation? Today we will be discussing the serial killer gene. What is it, and does it justify murder? The serial killer gene is a widely theorized topic, appearing in many popular media such as the hit show Riverdale. In the show, specific genes are shared by killers, and it allows scientists to link murderers to their DNA.
The one in the middle.
Correct again. Your intuition is like a sixth sense.
However, in real life, there is no scientific evidence used to support this ideal. Sorry, Riverdale, but it's a bit more complicated than that. While there is no scientific evidence proving one specific serial killer gene, there is, however, evidence that links aggression to genetics. In the late 1970s, a family from the Netherlands came to the University Hospital of Nijmegen with a dilemma. The men in their family had a notorious history of crimes, ranging from arson and rape to murder. After hearing the family out, the geneticist Hans Brunner decided to look to science for an explanation. From his findings, Brunner found that human aggression can be linked to the enzyme monoamine oxidase A, otherwise known as MAOA. This enzyme works to break down neurotransmitters in the brain such as dopamine and serotonin. However, when there's a lack of this MAOA enzyme, the neurotransmitters in someone's brain are not being broken down fast enough, and they have them in excess. This excess of neurotransmitters causes people to be more aggressive. Additionally, men tend to be more aggressive because MAOA is found on the X chromosome. Women have 2 X chromosomes, but men have 1, thus lowering their access to the enzyme and thus increasing their aggression. Brunner's extraordinary findings opened doors in fields such as criminology and forensic science. However, perhaps an unexpected result of Brunner's findings in modern times is the use of genetics in court. Defendants' genetic makeups are now being taken into consideration as a strategy against prosecution. All around the world, criminals are being tested for MAOA enzyme mutations. Criminals who have been tested and found to have these MAOA mutations are trying to use this evidence to reduce their jail sentences or plead not guilty on the basis of their genetics. However, this strategy is meritless. While genetics could be used to defend certain things in certain cases, they cannot be used to justify murder. Genetics are only potential for action. They do not eliminate choice. Yes, having MA mutations may cause one to be more susceptible to rage, but it is then their responsibility as a human in functioning society to control this pull towards violence. A clear example of this ideal can be seen with addiction. Studies have shown that roughly 50% of addiction can be attributed to genetics. In an article published by Cleveland Clinic, they state that addiction is a chronic relapsing brain disorder, and the genetic connection to addiction comes through inherited levels of dopamine. High levels of dopamine can fuel poor impulse control and tilt someone towards addictive behaviors. Sounds familiar, right? One can see how high levels of dopamine can affect decision-making in all areas of life. However, no one is using this fact to defend addicts in court. If an alcoholic is found to murder someone while drunk driving, they're being convicted for murder. If someone is found to be in possession of illegal substances, the courts don't care how addicted someone is to those substances. They only care that possessing them is a crime. So why should the court start caring when killers find out they're predisposed to murder? Furthermore, if someone is found to be predisposed to murder, why would we, as a society, wish to set them free knowing they are more likely to do harm? Unfortunately, some courts seem to be influenced by this argument. In the case of Tennessee v. Waldrop in 2011, Bradley Waldrop was being prosecuted for murdering his wife's friend and injuring his wife. The scene was said to be horrific and gory, disturbing to even the most seasoned police officers. However, Waldrop was not convicted of murder. He was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. The reason for this lower conviction? The jury found that his genetic makeup would play a role in the crime. After the defendants produced evidence of Waldrop's MAOA mutations to the jury, some sitting on the jury felt as if he had no choice in the matter and was bound to snap. Thankfully, Waldrop was still sentenced to 32 years in prison for his crimes, but the idea that he could have gotten off on a lower sentence based on his genetics is concerning. Even more concerning, perhaps, is the case of Abdelmalek Bayat. Bayat stabbed a man to death over an insult about his eye makeup. After being convicted, Bayat was tested for the MAOA gene mutation. Scientists found that Bayat had 5 MAOA gene mutations in his DNA, and once this evidence was produced to a judge, Bayat's sentence was reduced by a year. During my research, I interviewed a scientist named Craig Elliott to gain a more scientific perspective on the matter. Elliot has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for over 20 years and has graduated with a bachelor's in science and biology from Virginia Tech University. When presented with the current information, he confirmed that the findings of Bruner are very plausible and that genetics do play a large role in someone's personality. However, to what extent is unknown. This ties into the question of nature versus nurture, and Elliot suspects scientists will never be able to answer it. After discussing the validity of a possible serial killer gene, Elliot then commented on the use of MAOA mutations in court. He states, if you know they're genetically predisposed to causing violence, I feel like that should be just more reason to say they need to keep them confined. Furthermore, Elliot also commented on a possibility that genetic testing could expose. He fears that if society starts to begin accepting the ideal that aggression is tied into genetics, would people be forced to test their genetics against their will? And if someone were forced to test their genes and found to have MAOA mutations, but they haven't committed any crimes, would there still be a right to lock them up based on the potential in their DNA? Well, the answer should be no. Imagine finding a mutation in a baby's genetics and immediately deciding they are a killer. That's ridiculous, right? So how could society entertain the idea that genetics are responsible for crime when they could not convict someone innocent based solely on their genetics? If one could defend a criminal with this idea, they should also be able to prosecute an innocent with it as well. But they cannot because the argument is illogical. Genetics are merely a predisposition. They're not a greater power which eliminates choice. Overall, despite scientific evidence that genes can cause inclination towards aggression in certain individuals, a criminal is still a criminal. Genetics don't have anything to do with it. A person chooses to kill because killers are not born, they are made. Some courts have bought into the idea that genetics play a role in fault, and this could be detrimental to society. If someone is known to be a killer, they should not be free to kill. Genetic testing is still in its early stages of life, and there's so much more to be determined. Perhaps in the future there could be facilities or therapeutic retreats for people to go when they find out they have these mutations and they feel pull towards aggression. They could get therapists or other external help to keep them from doing something tragic. But as of now, we must push back against excuses. It is society's responsibility to provide a safe and functioning world for everyone to live in. And that starts by eliminating threats. It starts by convicting criminals based on what they have done, not what they were born with.